I guess I'm here today with Sandeep from St John's Ambulance, and purpose really of the session or sessions is that I'm going to sort of chat to Sandeep about his journey with data analytics within internal audit, and specifically at St John's Ambulance. It's a good story. It's an interesting one, and yeah, still on your journey as well, I think, Sandeep, as well. But do you want to maybe just introduce yourself, Sandeep?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Robin. So I'm Sandeep Das. I'm head of internal audit here at St John Ambulance. Joined the organisation back in November 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. So I am an accountant by trade. Started off in the world of external audit, but over time moved into a number of finance roles, and then found myself in internal audit, and have enjoyed it ever since. It's actually the first not-for-profit organisation I've worked for. Prior to that, I've worked typically in large publicly listed organisations. So definitely a bit of a change in environment, but a really positive experience. So that's a bit about me.
Cheers, Sandeep. And yeah, for those that don't know myself, so I'm Robin Clough. I'm the MD at DataConsulting. Been around for 15 years. In terms of what we do, it's generally helping teams to get more from the area of data analytics, and I guess our kind of bread and butter has really been sort of internal audit. Although we have ended up sort of stepping outside of audit and working with sort of functions within the business as well, in the area of sort of data analytics. So obviously, Sandeep, we've known you. Or I've known you for several years, obviously it's other organisations, but obviously it's an organisation such as St John's Ambulance. What was the kind of setup in regards to sort of data analytics within internal audit when you got there, and also sort of more generally within the charity itself?
Yeah, so I mean, just to give a bit of context about the organisation, so it's a name that everybody's heard of, but we are actually a charity, and our aim is first aid and health response. We've got about 1,700 employees now, but we have over 30,000 volunteers, which in itself has its own challenges when you think about data and systems and levels of data with those numbers of people that we're talking about. We obviously work closely with the NHS. We support the ambulance service. We've supported the COVID vaccination program as well over the last couple of years. In terms of when I joined, as I mentioned earlier, in November 2020. And at that point, the internal audit function was fully in-house. And due to the pandemic, there were a number of redundancies and movements, and there was actually only one person left in internal audit. So I joined, and then we doubled the team to a size of 2. And at that point, actually, we'd never used any data analytics, as far as I was aware, at St John to that point in time. So it had all been kind of your traditional substantive audit, sample testing, etc. And it had all been done in-house. So there's never been any kind of co-source or external support. So that's kind of what I inherited when I first joined.
Yeah. But obviously, I guess when you've worked elsewhere, you've been a bit of a fan of data analytics. So I guess to go from doing no real sort of analytics at all, how did you manage to, get moving, if you like, and dip your toe in that area at St John's?
So I really knew that we had to change our approach. The old-fashioned days of selecting a sample of 10 invoices and then writing a report about it really should be put into the past. And but what I also knew is that this was a journey that would take some time and it would take some effort, and I had to think carefully about how to best implement it, especially considering at that point we were in a pandemic. I wasn't really getting any face-to-face contact to speak to people and kind of sell what I was hoping to do. But in a way, it also helped in that, all I had to look at was a computer screen and the data that people would send me. So really, actually, data analytics made a lot of sense. This sort of journey is something that I've done in the past at a previous company. So I already had, a plan in mind as to what to do. But the first thing I needed to do was get an understanding of the systems that we have in place at the organisation. So I needed to understand the system architecture. It's not just the finance systems, but your HR systems, CRMs, etc., and really get an understanding of what we have in place. And again, there's challenges there when you're all sitting at home and trying to get that understanding. And then also just understanding the quality of the data behind that. But I knew that, the obvious places to look at are your expenses and your purchase to pay. So I already had in the back of my mind, there's probably a couple of areas that I really want to dig into and understand, what data do we have, and is it of, a reasonable enough quality to allow me to at least get the ball rolling when it came to data analytics.
Yeah. So you focused, I think initially, didn't you, on expenses, and obviously that's when you sort of got in touch with ourselves. And I know one of the first things that we kind of chatted about was, what sort of technology we should use. And I guess obviously with ourselves as well, obviously keen to build up a relationship with yourselves and work with you, and always been keen to sort of work with organisations like yourselves. So initially, I guess we kind of said, well, let's forget about the cost and just see where we end up. Which again, from our point of view, I think that was a fairly easy decision to make, because it was, like I say, something we wanted to do, and it'd be good to also to help get you kind of going on your analytics journey. But yeah, I guess you didn't really have a dedicated analytics tool at your disposal, I guess. So we decided obviously that Excel would probably be not a bad place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so as you say, we didn't have any data analytics software in house, and obviously coming in new, it was just myself and the existing auditor, and I could quickly tell that we didn't have the in-house skill set to do this ourselves. So even if we were to purchase software, it would just be sitting on the shelves, which I think happens in a lot of organizations. And so that's why we thought, actually, can we reach out to DataConsulting and see if they can help us? And actually, it was really helpful to have that approach that we took, because what may have happened is we may have spent a lot of time looking at the systems and data and found out that we just weren't in a position for it to work. And doing it the way that we did get to a good place where actually, now it's actually, we could develop a kind of dashboard and a product together that's actually, marketable and useful for us, as opposed to, purchasing a software, spending lots of time, and then finding out actually the data's no good to get any results. So the data still has a long way to go in terms of improving, but I think the approach that we took has worked quite well, and we focused on one area, one data set, and kind of worked together and had lots of conversations to really build up what we could do, and really focus on what was achievable with what we had.
Yeah. So I guess the key thing for me is, obviously, if you've if you've not really got an off-the-shelf data analytics tool, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to go out and spend potentially a lot of money and buy one. Excel, I know some people probably maybe look down on it a little bit, as it's not really an analytics tool, and it's not really any good for us. But actually, I think we sort of demonstrated working with yourselves that actually you can do a heck of a lot in Excel. And there's no reason why, I don't know, a small sort of internal audit team, or one with sort of limited resources, limited budget, can't just use Excel, which I'm sure 99.9% people will probably have Excel available to them on their laptop. And obviously there's lots of training out there. Yeah, obviously you could give us a ring, obviously, but also if you want to do it yourself, there's lots of training out there and guidance in terms of how you can sort of use Excel for data analytics.
I think Excel is a good, the Excel of 2022 is really different from the Excel of when I was using it 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago. So it really has come on, and there's a lot more functionality. There is actually a lot that you can do on there that gets you, a lot of those kind of basic scripts or tests that you may have run on a dedicated data analytics software. So I think it really is a good place to start.
Absolutely. No, there's a lot of functionality that's been added in the last sort of 2 or 3 years, and I think a lot of that functionality has been kind of pinched from sort of Power BI. I think they've almost sort of built Power BI in the background, but taken some of the features of Power BI and kind of added them into Excel. And I guess with your journey as well, obviously today we'll probably talk mostly about Excel, but I know that you've now got some managed to get some resources, and you've now got some sort of expertise in house in the area of Power BI, which something we see quite a lot of is people kind of starting in Excel. Some of them kind of stay there, stick with Excel and use it to its maximum, but then others kind of might just sort of take that sort of leap of faith and try something maybe people will probably see as next up in kind of like the pecking order of using Power BI. And I know that yourselves, you are starting to have some sort of some success with Power BI as well.
Yes, and I mean, as an organisation, we're on a kind of a digital transformation, as a lot of organisations are, and so Power BI is a tool that the organisation is starting to use to, especially around data visualization, to put together dashboards and present results to senior management. So if we start using that as internal audit, that aligns well to what management are already starting to see. And I've been very lucky in terms of, we've got a new internal auditor that's joined the team and has used Excel at quite an advanced level and Power BI, which has really kind of complemented our existing skill set. I think what's happening now more and more is, especially auditors younger than me, of which many are, I would imagine, it's not a new tool. It's something that they will have used in a number of organizations beforehand, and it will, come naturally to them. Whereas perhaps it doesn't come as naturally to someone like myself. But what I'm finding is that people, whether it's Power BI, Tableau, or ClickView or anything else, they will have had experience of some sort of data visualization tool in one form or another. And I think that's really, really valuable for an internal audit function.
So just going back to your kind of first area of analysis, which was expenses. And that was probably, I don't know, we probably started it a good sort of 9 to 12 months ago, I think. So in terms of the work that was done in that particular area, what's been the outcomes from that, particularly the successes, if you like, from that particular piece?
Yeah, so in terms of the mechanics, what we were able to do was reach out to our finance team and get a data download of a number of months from the system, and then obviously share it with your team. And then we worked together very carefully on what types of tests or what we would be looking at, and we looked at it, I guess, with a fraud angle, and that's often the case when it comes to expenses. We looked at, what are the risks around fraud, and it was an interesting time because we were in the midst of the pandemic. It just wasn't a normal year or a normal period of time where you would expect to see expenses flowing and what normal expenses you would see. A lot of our activity is, attending events and supporting events, and also first aid training, but a lot of that activity was paused. And so it was strange. It was a strange time, but it was also a really good time to look and potentially identify any anomalies in the data. So we took that data, we put it into kind of a one tab visual with lots of graphs, different colors, different formats, pie charts, bar graphs. And then in addition to that, once we had that, really it was a case of telling the story. And I think that's the important piece, to make sure that it is successful with management, is you can show them some graphs, some spreadsheets, but what you need to do is kind of talk about the story behind the numbers. Now, luckily, because of the pandemic, we did have a bit of a story to tell in terms of, I think it was at the point where things were starting to come back online, events were starting, and therefore we saw that naturally reflect in the data we had, that the numbers were picking up. Where were we spending money? Was it mostly on mileage, subsistence, supplies, etc.? And so I think we were able to firstly tell a story from the numbers, which kind of brought it to life, but we were also able to give the executive committee, but also the trustees, some assurance around those fraud pieces that we were looking at, and that was of concern to them with the current situation, everybody working from home, people in difficult situations, that the heightened risk of fraud was clearly there, and we were able to provide some assurance around that, which I think was very well received. So I think there's picking an area that management are interested in, and that they're going to find a value, and then also how you kind of present that in kind of telling a story and giving them some positive assurance. So that was the approach that we took, kind of holistically, starting from the raw data all the way through to churning the numbers to a really useful output that people are going to understand.
Yeah. And I guess it wasn't a case of it was developed sort of overnight. We've kind of done it over several months, and it's kind of been a process of looking at where we are and refining it and making it better based on, I guess, feedback from yourself and anyone else that was kind of looking at the analysis that had been done.
Yeah, and I think each time we do it, there's a new iteration or there's a new, could we do this test? Is the
Yeah,
data good enough to do this? But also where there's information missing. So, from previous organizations where we've used systems such as Concur in far more regulated industries, whereas compared to the system we use here, which is perhaps not to that level. There's lots of fields that aren't mandatory, or the data's not quite right or not complete, and therefore it also allows us to give some good recommendations, ideas to management of how they can strengthen their controls. Should you make this field mandatory? So, for example, if somebody is unable to or doesn't submit a receipt, do they have to complete a mandatory field with an explanation?
yeah,
And things like that to really tighten up the control. So there's that element of each time that we do it, there's a lot of data, and you hone in on a certain area and you find out something new, which you can share with management, which I think is really beneficial.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So in terms of the actual process itself, you pretty much say it was a success. Yeah.
I think it's worked really well, and you never know how these things are going to turn out. But I think the team at Data Consulting have been really helpful to just kind of sit with us, and a lot of it is just looking at the data and just having calls back and forth and
Yeah.
thinking about what can we do with the data. What does the data mean? Some of it's going back to finance. Say, what do these,
Yeah.
what does this row or column? What are you actually telling me here? And understanding that,
Yeah.
and then just, there is several iterations even for the first go that we had, and then really just thinking about the visuals as well. So we worked very closely together, because I've obviously being part of St John and knowing the executive committee and the trustees, I know what's going to land well, what looks good
Yeah.
visually, and you guys have the data and the skills, and then it's kind of
Yeah.
getting to a point where we're really producing a high quality product that I know people are going to look
Yeah.
at. And what I want is somebody to kind of pick it up and take a look at it and go, oh, wow, this is quite interesting.
Yeah. 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 I know that's definitely the way we like to work with our clients, is as collaboratively as
Yeah.
possible, and just really help you to get to where you want to be. I guess in terms of obviously it's been, like I say, a good sort of 12 months or so now, but I guess as somebody who's gone from sort of doing sort of zero analytics to now doing a reasonable sort of chunk, what would your sort of top tips or advice to be to like say a small audit function, or an audit function that has sort of limited resources, both in terms of folk and maybe sort of budget as well?
Yeah, I think the key thing for me is to start small and start with that low hanging fruit. An area where you're probably going to get some sort of results: expenses, purchase to pay, could be
Yeah.
accounts receivable, could be a CRM. But pick one specific area, pick an area that you know a little bit about the systems and the data, but you also know that your management are interested. Ultimately, they're going to have to sign off the budget for you to kind of expand this in the future.
Yeah.
Start small. Think about doing a proof of concept, a bit like what we did. We kind of did a
Yeah.
lot of back and forth, and now I think it works quite well in terms of a product for expenses.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it does work, and you publish your results to management, try and shout about it as much as you can.
Yeah.
If it's been successful, let people know. Speak to anybody that listens, not just management, not just finance, but
Yeah.
whenever you have a meeting, say to people, it could be a comms team, it could be a project management team, it could be a data and insights team. Tell them that you've started using data analytics, you've had some success. It would
Yeah.
be great to find out what other departments are doing, or what skill sets they have, or what systems they use, and really just basically publicize any positive results.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess obviously we do tend to focus on the positives, but what were the major sort of challenges? What was the challenges or hurdles that you had to sort of overcome in terms of making this a success?
So I guess it's just really, firstly, getting some budget to have a go at this, and that's where it helped to kind of work initially at no cost till we knew
Yeah.
that we would get to a point that it would work.
Yeah.
And in an organization that's never really had an internal audit function that's used data analytics, and also in an organization that is quite early on in its digital transformation, it's really just trying to get that message across to people. And again, that's where if you can start small and produce some results and spread that message, it won't happen overnight, it won't happen in 3 to 6 months, but over a period of time, it will grow. And data and digital is only going in one direction, and so in the future everything will be, not very much is paper based nowadays. Everything is going to be on systems. And the other thing I would say to do is just think about, now that you know that you can use Excel as a potential tool, every single audit that you do, just think about, is there a system involved? What's the data? Can I get access? Can I get a download? And can I do any kind of drilling into that, even if it's very basic? And that's kind of your start of your journey of data analytics. Every single audit you do, have a think about the data as well as the processes and controls and what you can do outside of those kind of traditional substantive pick a sample type tests.
Yeah. Sounds good. And I guess what are your plans for the next sort of 6 to 12 months then? Sort of obviously you're going to carry on building on the expenses, but any other sort of areas you've pinpointed to look at?
So I think there's pretty much everything would be ideal, but and that's where we hope to get to at some point, that every audit that we perform, there is an element of data analytics, whether it's in the field work or whether it's right up front at the planning to identify risk areas. I'd like to build it into every audit, but in terms of what we're looking at, we've looked at expenses, but I'd like to delve into the finance system to see what the data is like for accounts payable, accounts receivable. I think we're looking at a number of upgrades and new systems coming on board. For me, HR is a very good area that people don't often consider for data analytics, but in an organization such as ours, where we have 1,700 employees and over 30,000 volunteers, that's a lot of data for us to look at and interrogate. And then also, I think on the commercial side of things is your CRM system, so your customer relationship management system, and the data around that is another rich data source where it would be, and again, it depends on the systems and the quality of data, what the risks are, what you're hoping to get out of it. But for me, the opportunities are there, and it's just taking it a step at a time. But yeah, my mind generally is always racing in terms of new areas where I can potentially bring some data analytics into the foray.
Yeah. Well, it's been fantastic talking to you, Sandeep, and I think what you've had to say today is a lot of people find really useful to hear. But yeah, anything else you wanted to add before we maybe go on? I guess boil the kettle again for another cup of tea.
I just actually I did make a cup of tea and haven't had a chance to drink it. I've forgotten about that. Let me have one sip and then I'll tell you my top tips. So what I would say, just recapping a lot, to be fair, on what I've just said, but you need to start with understanding what systems you have and what data you have. Pick that low hanging fruit. Try and pick something that your audit committee, your C-suite, your management are going to be interested in, because you can pick an area and it can be amazing and you can have great results, but if the management aren't really interested, it's not a risk to the organization, you've kind of wasted your time. Think very carefully about the model. I've had it in the past where I've had an in-house resource that could do a lot of this stuff, and it was a key person dependency. They moved on after a couple of years and I was literally back to square one. So think very carefully, especially in your smaller internal audit shops, about how you're going to approach this. Do you want to do this in-house? Do you want to use co-source? Do you want to use an organization like DataConsulting to support you? And then finally, really, it's just keep the momentum going. You may not succeed the first time or even the second time, but just keep having a go at different data sets until you get some positive results.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks very much, Sandeep. That's been a really, really good session.